Hello, quick message before the video starts. I'd just like to mention that the building behind me in this video is indeed the Pentagon. I legally cannot film on the premises of the Pentagon, so I went for the next best thing. I realize I don't mention that in my video at all, but I'm not standing in front of some random building just for the funsies. Also, I am not a professional editor, so if any of these edits are really chunky, uh, don't blame me. Welcome to How the Pentagon Papers and New York Times versus US Changed History. We should all be familiar with the case New York Times versus United States because it gave publications the right to publish stories that could expose the actions of the government. But you may not have noticed a crucial role missing in this case, the role of a whistleblower. Oxford Dictionary defines whistleblowers as a person who informs people in authority or the public that the company they work for is doing something wrong or illegal. The year is 1969, and a guy named Daniel Ellsberg started working for the government as a contractor from the Rand Corporation and is given access to many classified documents. But before all of that can happen, the defense secretary under President Lyndon Johnson, Robert McNamara, made a special task force in order to create a timeline of American involvement in Vietnam. However, McNamara didn't inform President Johnson. Instead of using this timeline of events to show how powerful the United States is, he wanted to use it as a cautionary tale for future generations. McNamara knows anything painting the United States in a bad light will get him labeled as untrustworthy, a communist, and unpatriotic. After keeping it secret for many years, the project was finally completed on January 15, 1969, only 5 days before Richard Nixon was sworn in as president. Only a few copies of the report were published, and some copies made their way to the Rand Corporation, which were seen by a very outraged Ellsberg. Ellsberg had a very important decision to make. The people did have a right to know all of that information. However, another lovely piece of legislation known as the Espionage Act of 1917 forbids the top secret information of the United States to be released to the public, even if the government is participating in illegal activity. This act has been the main reason for the persecution of dozens of whistleblowers in the government. The Espionage Act is also connected to another required court case, Schenck versus United States, and has a long history of punishing anyone deemed as un-American. Ellsberg took the photocopied documents and presented them to a reporter with the New York Times, Neil Sheehan. However, the New York Times was concerned with the possible legal trouble that could be brought on by the major leak of top-secret documents, and the Times was strongly advised not to publish the information found by Ellsberg. However, the Pentagon Papers began to be published in the New York Times on June 13, 1971, nearly 2 years after Ellsberg had obtained the documents. These documents showed that the US had been lying to people since the Second World War. It didn't take long for everyone to start talking about this massive leak of government information. Many others were also bound to notice. The Nixon administration had a storm brewing on their hands. Since Ellsberg had obtained the documents illegally, Nixon could strike back with injunctions and persecution under the Espionage Act, and Ellsberg knew that Nixon would come after him. Fearing the worst, Ellsberg went on the run for 13 days and hid in a motel room. Nixon was livid, but he didn't know who had released the information in the first place. To find the source of the leak, he put a group together that would eventually become known as the Plumbers. These plumbers would become the masterminds of the infamous Watergate break-in. And here's a soundbite of Nixon talking about Ellsberg's manhunt.
I just say that we've got to keep our eye on the main ball. The main ball's Ellsberg. We got to get this son of a bitch.
Nixon also sought out the help of everyone's least favorite, Henry Kissinger. Kissinger advised him to take action against the New York Times since it could set a dangerous precedent for leaking future government information. Nixon and his attorney general issued a federal court injunction stopping them from publishing any more information. Not wanting to silence the story, the New York Times took their case all the way up to the Supreme Court. While Ellsberg hid out in his motel room, he began to leak information to the Washington Post. Nixon decided to stop their publication next. However, The United States District Court, sensing a theme, refused to give an injunction because the Nixon administration had refused to meet the burden of proof. This would become a deciding factor in the case, too. Nixon could not restrain the media without the burden of proof. But we would have never known about the government's overreach of power without the important role of a whistleblower, just like in the Vietnam War and other government overreaches of power, just like Ellsberg and hundreds of others. Fin. Everybody's favorite war criminal, Henry Kissinger. Yeah.